Hey guys, so we are starting on chapter 22 in this video. It's going to be part one of two videos for chapter 22, which is all about plant growth and development. So I am going to share my screen and let's get started. So online, your chapter 21 and chapter 22 PowerPoint, it's all in one. It's a longer PowerPoint, but it's just because chapter 21 was really short. We only included a few sections from that. So chapter 22 is on the reproduction and development of flowering plants specifically. And in next week sometime, I think, yes, it's definitely next week, we will talk about the difference between flowering plants and other types of plants, because flowering is actually one of those key adaptations that led to huge amounts of diversification in the plant world. So flowers are the sex organs of angiosperms. Angiosperm is a flowering plant. Okay, so angiosperms are flowering plants. Gymnosperms are not flowering plants. So they make things like pine cones, things like that, for instance, not flowers. So here you've got a bee that is gathering pollen, and as this bee moves to different flowers, what's happening is that on its trunk, just all over its abdomen, it is basically pollen is just sticking to it. And so as it's moving to other plants, that pollen from a previous plant is getting deposited onto a new plant, potentially pollinating another flower. So might deliver sperm to the next flower it visits, because pollen is literally just plant sperm, okay? Pollen is produced by, and you can see them here, and we'll talk about all of them today, but these anthers that are the male reproductive organs of plants. They produce pollen. Pollen is picked up by pollinators or by the wind sometimes, or rain or whatever. And it is able to, if it lands on the female reproductive organ, then it is going to pollinate that plant. So flowers and seeds are produced by angiosperms that sexually reproduce. Now, you have some flowering plants that can both reproduce sexually and reproduce asexually, but the flowers and the seeds are particularly only important if they are reproducing sexually, meaning that you have, sometimes you don't even need two separate parents, because sometimes you can have flowers that have both male and female reproductive organs on the same plant, okay? But it, just like anything that is sexually reproducing, it's just gonna increase that genetic variation in a population, because let's say a flower does have both male and female reproductive organs. It could pollinate itself, or it could also but it could also potentially pollinate the flower next door or the flowers anywhere. So some species of angiosperms, like I said, they also reproduce asexually, forming new individuals by mitotic cell division. Now, guys, mitotic division is mitosis. So in this case, you're not dealing with sperm and egg cells. You're not, you only need a single parent that is basically making a genetic clone of itself. So in both of these cases, you have asexual reproduction, where they are genetically identical to each other and their offspring. So here you've got a grove of aspen trees, heart, because aspens are my favorite trees ever. And guys, I am like Casper the Friendly Ghost. I am translucent. How cool is it that this freaking tree, a whole grove of these trees, are freaking making their own sunscreen all over their bark? It literally has its own sunscreen, like brilliant. Cooler about aspen trees is that underground, they actually reproduce asexually. So the way that you come up with a new aspen tree is through this root system. So if you find an aspen grove, if you're ever in an aspen grove, it's all a single organism connected by a single shared root system. It's incredible. So the roots will expand, pop up another aspen tree. Roots will expand, pop up another aspen tree. Now that's amazing because they can cover a lot of land. It's amazing for a lot of reasons, a lot of habitat, lots of stuff. But what's unfortunate about this is that since they preferentially reproduce asexually, they are going to be vulnerable to things like pathogens, because if the pathogen could kill one of these trees, it could potentially kill all of the trees. And here you have a plant that also reproduces asexually. Now what this does is basically at every little node, like we talked about in chapter 21, they are producing these little plantlets. And you can also see at every single one of these little plantlets, they're producing their own little roots. So if they were to fall off, or if they were to be brushed and sort of knocked off, or if this leaf of this plant is laying on the ground, each of these little plantlets would be able to put out their own root systems and develop on its own. Asexual reproduction is advantageous when you have a stable environment and plants are well adapted to their surroundings. Yes, so in an unchanging environment, asexual reproduction is a great method of reproduction. Whereas sexual reproduction, it's going to produce these varied offspring, these genetically variable offspring, increasing reproductive success in a changing world. Because, for instance, if a pathogen comes into both environments, let's say with this aspen tree and with this flowering plant right here, is it going to kill all of these flowering plants that reproduce via sexual reproduction? Probably not, because there's increased genetic variability in these populations. Would it kill all of these aspen trees? Probably so, because they're literally a single organism. All right, so guys, when we're talking about like the overall structure of a flower, a perfect flower, now this is not subjective. In botany, botanical terms, there are perfect and imperfect flowers. Now, a perfect flower has all four whorls of a flower, and we're going to talk about the whorls, the different whorls, but a perfect flower has all four, and all four of the whorls are modified leaves. This makes sense because angiosperms originally came from plants that only had leaves, okay, that did not have these flowers. So every single whorl that we're going to talk about is a modified leaf with a new function. So your first whorl is it's called the calyx. We're just going to call it the sepals. Okay, so the sepals, if you look at the bottom of like any flower, okay, think about like a rose or something. At the base of a rose, you have those little bitty, like tiny leaves. Well, that's because they are modified leaves. They're called the sepals. And when that rose was in a bud, the like fleshy leaves that are making up that bud, those are the sepals. So that when it opens up, reveals all of these petals and all these reproductive organs, the sepals just like diminish and they go away. Okay, they don't fully go away necessarily, but they're going to like become smaller. Whorl 2, oh, okay, I just didn't highlight this. Whorl 2, it's called the corolla. We're just going to call it the petals. So you had sepal, petals. Petals are going to attract pollinators. A lot of them are going to attract pollinators. Other than that, they don't really have a very specific function. So sepal, petal, then whorl 3 are called your stamens. Whorl 3, these are your male reproductive parts. So the stamen, you've got two different parts that make up a stamen. So think about the male reproductive system in humans. Is the male reproductive system just made up of a penis? No. Okay, you have a whole lot of stuff going on in the male reproductive system. So just like that in males, you've got your stamen, which is made up of your filament, which is this long structure, and then the anther, which is at the tip of that stamen. Okay, the filament is basically going to send pollen out from the anther. So on the anther, it's kind of like this, in a lot of plants, they're sticky. And so when a pollinator comes up to this flower and is like walking around, that anther is going to like dust whatever pollinator has just come with their own pollen, okay? So whorl 3 are the stamens. These are the male reproductive parts. Whorl 4 are the female reproductive parts, and we're calling them the carpel. So again, is the female reproductive system in humans, is it just made up of an ovary? No, of course not. You have a ton of different parts of the female reproductive system too. So in the carpel, in the carpel of a perfect flower, you have this little ovule in the center. It's like an egg, a little egg in the center, held by an ovary. So just like in the female reproductive system, you got oocytes within 2 ovaries, okay? So you've got an ovule within an ovary, and then this long tube is called the style, and then this stigma, the stigma is where, say that you have a bumblebee and it has been to different flowers and has pollen all over its abdomen. If it lands on the stigma, that pollen from the bumblebee will land on the stigma, this part right here at the end. That pollen will travel down the style and will basically fertilize this ovule within the ovary. Okay, so a carpel includes the ovary, encloses one or more ovules, a stalk-like style. On top of the style, you've got the stigma. Stigma receives pollen. So the 4 whorls, what I need you to write down and like, just remember it like this. Just remember it like this. Your 4 whorls, because I'm going to ask you them in order, or I'm going to ask you what's whorl 3. So just recite this over and over and over to yourself. Hold on, wait, okay, I just need to make sure we were recording. I was like, this is an important bit. Like, I need to make sure we're recording. Okay, sepal, petal, stamen, carpel. Sepal, petal, stamen, carpel. Sepal, petal, stamen, carpel. If I'm asking you about the whorls of a perfect flower, I'm not talking about like a flower that I like. I'm talking about a perfect flower has both male and female reproductive parts, and it's got all 4 of those flower whorls. So sepals, which enclose the bud of the flower, petals that attract pollinators, stamen, those are the male reproductive parts, and carpel, which are the female reproductive parts. Let me go back. Sepal, petal, stamen, carpel. So some flowers release pollen grains into the wind like this. If you've got a windy day and it's just brushing pollen all over the place. This is how, for instance, when you wake up and there's pollen like all over your car, okay? That wind pollination. Other flowers attract animal pollinators. Okay, so if you have, for instance, these are flowers from a cactus that is freaking bat pollinated. How badass is that? Okay, so a bat is going, once the flower is all open and everything, the bat goes to get the nectar that's deep within this flower. But the flower and the evolution of this flower made its anatomy really, really freaking smart. So on the edges, where this bat's like head is literally in there, it is getting dusted with pollen that it's then gonna go and pollinate other flowers with. So it's brilliant. And the same thing is gonna happen with all of these different pollinators. All right, a clear question that you would have had in class. An imperfect flower is one that lacks either male or female reproductive parts. A flower lacking male parts would still produce what? A flower lacking male parts would still produce what? Okay. Would it produce pollen? Would it produce anthers? Would it produce ovules? Would it produce ovaries? Both ovules and ovaries. Okay, so the male reproductive parts. What makes up the stamen? right? You had the filament and then you had the anther, and that anther was going to basically let loose all the pollen. Okay, so anthers and pollens are the male reproductive parts in these answers. Okay, I was checking on my dogs, it's thundering. All right, so these are the male reproductive parts. If a flower lacks male parts, would it still produce A and B? No, it wouldn't. Ovules, are they produced by the male reproductive organs? No, this is like an egg. The ovaries, are they produced by a male reproductive organ? No. Okay, so the answer is E. Okay, if a pollen grain lands on a receptive stigma, which if you remember, you had this like the ovule within the ovary down here, you had this long style, and then at the top of the style, you had that little nub, that was the stigma. If pollen, like this, lands on the stigma, it moves down the style, and you're going to have pollination. So pollination is going to be how you end up with fruits. And we're going to talk fruits and seeds, okay? We're going to talk about how, like, all your different types of fruits and things in just a second. But so if you have a flower and that flower is pollinated, you see all these anthers around it, and either the stigma is way down in there so that pollen could fall into it, or this might be the stigma right here. I can't really tell. So if this plant is pollinated, what will happen is that the flower loses its petals. There's no need for further pollination. It doesn't need to attract pollinators anymore. It loses its petals. Petals also, because they're a living part of the plant, they take up energy. So you lose the petals, okay? Next, a developing seed releases hormones that trigger fruit formation. So you have this seed inside of this ovary that has just been pollinated. Now you're going to make a fruit, and it literally, that ovary of the flower is going to swell to become the fruit, okay? The ovary swells. So look at this. It goes from a little bit swollen to a lot swollen, and then all of a sudden you've got a freaking apple. You got a freaking fruit. Like, look at this pregnant little plant. Like, can relate. Okay, and then, okay, so if you have seen apples on the top, especially apples that you would get from like a farmer's market or something, you see the little, like right where you would have the stem, the little like leaf looking structures up at the top of your apple. Guess what? That's remnants from like this whole encasement, okay? All right, guys, we're going to talk about all the different forms fruit comes in. So your first fruit form, while I'm moving my box, is a simple fruit type. So your simple fruit type examples are going to be olives, cherries, peaches, plums, coconuts, grapes, tomatoes, pepper, eggplant, apple, pear. It's derived from one flower with one carpel. So you're going to get this one like distinguished fruit, okay? So that's simple, one flower with one carpel. Now it gets a little bit more complicated than this, but first, for simple is not always just something like a cherry. Here you see a sunflower. Now your sunflower's freaking amazing because this is a close-up of a sunflower, and every single one of these little distinct shapes on the inside of the sunflower, guess what? Those are going to each end up being the sunflower seeds. They're each going to end up with these simple fruits because each one of these is a flower itself. You've got two different types of flowers in a sunflower. First, you have the disc flowers in the center. These will make seeds. And then on the sides, you have ray flowers, which are only going to produce petals, okay? Now, the ray flowers, they are not going to produce seeds, okay? They're just attracting the pollinators, which then pollinate the center, which then will come out with seeds, okay? All right, so each one of these petals is a separate flower. Each one of these disc flowers is a separate flower that has one carpel. Okay, we're gonna watch this video. Let me stop sharing so I can get up what I wanna show you. This is so cute and short. So what we saw here, I'm just gonna pause this. All right, so he planted one seed, it came out with one plant. That plant has a ton of flowers. They're just aggregated in that, what they call the head of the sunflower, okay? So a ton of flowers in there. Each one has a single carpel and is going to make its seed itself. So you just have one seed making a ton of flowers that each can make a seed, except for the ray flowers, right? Which the ray flowers are there to bring in pollinators, attract pollinators. Once all of the, and I'll see if I can, once all of these disc flowers were pollinated, the ray flowers died off. They were going away. There's nothing else to happen here. Those seeds are just going to mature. You see it, they're going away, going away, going away, gone. Isn't that amazing? Like what? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and share your PowerPoint again. Okay, so those were simple fruit types. Now you've got an aggregate fruit type, which is derived from one flower with many separate carpels. Okay, one flower with many separate carpels. That means you're going to get like plenty of seeds. So, okay, so for instance, on this strawberry, each one of these little dots is actually a seed. Okay, you have many carpels on one of these. All right, so this is the fruit. So this isn't the flower. So you need to think of the actual flower. Now, okay, like how can I wish that we were in person because I would like, I would have examples for you, but you had a whole bunch of separate carpels. They were all fertilized in order to make this one fruit out of many carpels. Okay, so that's an aggregate fruit type. Examples are blackberries, strawberries, raspberries, and magnolias. All right, so here you've got a magnolia. You had one flower, right? One magnolia flower that had many carpels. And when all of them are fertilized, you get these big, gigantic red seeds. And then each of those will go away, potentially make a new magnolia tree, each with one flower, many carpels. Okay. All right, then you have multiple fruit types. So derived from tightly clustered flowers whose ovaries fuse as the fruit develops. So you have these separate carpels with these ovaries, and the ovaries are fused at the base. So kind of like a pineapple. Have you ever cut open a pineapple before? Can you just eat the entire pineapple? No, you cannot eat the entire pineapple. So that's why, because they're physically fused at the base. This will help you see it better. So this is a pineapple, a freaking pineapple. And you've got all of these flowers, okay, that when they are all pollinated, at the base, like on the very inside of this plant, they're all fused. All of these flowers' carpels are fused. So by pollinating all of these, you're making one fruit from a whole bunch of carpels, but that were all fused, okay? All right, so here, in fact, you can even see these flowers on the outside. How crazy is that? They're all bunched together and they're fused in the middle. Multiple fruit. All right, now we're going to talk about different ways that you can disperse these fruits and seeds. Fruits are going to protect and disperse seeds, and you've got many different types of fruits that you wouldn't even think of as a fruit. So seeds carried away from the parent plants decrease the chance of competition among parents, offspring, and siblings. So the further you can disperse your own seeds, your offspring, the better, because remember, in any one environment, there are limited resources. There's competition for those resources, et cetera, et cetera. One habitat can only hold so much and support so much. So the goal is disbursement. And there are ways that you can do that. So one is via fruits and having organisms consume fruits, and then seeds from the fruits are deposited in the bird or dog or bear or deer, whatever droppings. So if you have an unripe fruit, the fruits are usually distasteful. So you have, if you have organisms in nature that eat fruits, they know exactly when to harvest them. They know exactly when they are ripe enough to eat. When they are ripe, that means that the seed is ready. So you don't want your fruit to be ripe too early, because you don't want your seeds dispersed before your seeds are ready, okay? So ripe fruits are tasty, mature seeds are deposited in their droppings. Then you can have these prickly fruits, like these burrs that stick to feathers or fur. What happens with these? Your freaking dog gets its face into places where it shouldn't be. It's got burrs all over its body. Next thing you know, they're dropping off in different places. Some fruits catch wind with tufts or fluff, like a dandelion, okay? Here's a fruit that is attached to a freaking seed. The goal, again, is disbursement. Others float off in water currents. All right, guys, so this is the end of part 1 for chapter 22. I'm gonna record part 2 as well, and then I'm gonna upload them. So y'all have a great day, and I will see you in the next one.